On a stormy night, Elena, a waitress, makes a choice that will change her life forever. A simple act of kindness toward a disabled boy catches the eye of a billionaire CEO. What was the relationship between the billionaire CEO and the disabled boy? And what happened next with Elena? Once you find out, you will be shocked. So let's begin the story. The storm raged outside, its furious winds howling through the empty streets of Haven Creek. Inside the Haven Street Diner, the warmth of the dimly lit space offered little comfort to Elena Harper. She moved between the tables, her eyes heavy with exhaustion as she wiped down the counter, her mind on nothing but the end of her shift. But then something caught her attention, something that would change everything. A small boy, no older than 8, sat alone on the cold, wet curb outside. His clothes were soaked, his face pale as he shivered in the rain. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't just stand there. She couldn't ignore the look in his eyes, the silent plea for help. Without a second thought, she rushed outside, her heart pounding in her chest. "Hey, are you all right?" she called out, her voice breaking through the storm. The boy didn't respond immediately, his body trembling from the cold. His fragile hands clutched his backpack like a lifeline, and his eyes, big and scared, looked up at her. I'm I'm waiting for my dad," he whispered, his voice weak and fragile, barely audible over the rain. Elena's heart twisted in her chest. She could see it in his face. His legs weren't just tired, they were crippled. He couldn't sit there, exposed to the storm any longer. Not like this. "Come on, you're coming with me," she said, her voice firm but gentle, as she knelt beside him. Without hesitation, Elena lifted him up, supporting him as she guided him into the diner. Her heart raced as she led him to a booth, her hands shaking as she gently helped him sit down. "I'll get you something warm," she promised, already moving toward the kitchen. As Elena hurried to prepare a meal for the boy, something, or someone, caught her eye. Through the rain-smeared window, a sleek Bentley sat across the street, its windows tinted black. Behind those windows, a man sat watching. Alexander Kingston, billionaire CEO of Titan Industries. He had just concluded a meeting in the building across the street and was waiting for his driver when he saw it. The boy, Oliver, alone in the storm. But what really held Alexander's attention wasn't just the boy. It was Elena. He watched as she took Oliver's trembling hand, her actions full of tenderness and care. There was no hesitation, no calculation in her eyes, just raw, unfiltered kindness. Elena Harper wasn't just a waitress. She was something rare. In a world that often demanded more than it gave, she had given without a second thought. He had watched countless people, some with power, some with wealth, and he had seen many of them use their influence for themselves. But Elena, she had used her influence to change the world of a helpless child. The thought struck Alexander like a thunderclap. This woman with no title, no grand qualifications, had done what no one else had been able to do for his son. She had offered him something no money could buy, care, and now Alexander couldn't let her walk away without knowing the impact she had made. As the storm began to subside, Alexander knew he had to meet Elena. But more than that, he had to offer her something. Something that would change her life forever, just as she had unknowingly changed his son's. The following day, the rain had cleared, but the weight of the previous night's events lingered in the air. Elena's shift had ended late, and she had barely managed to crawl into bed before the exhaustion overwhelmed her. As she sipped her morning coffee, the memory of the boy, Oliver, kept flashing through her mind. His innocent face, his quiet plea for help, the way she'd helped him into the diner like he was the most important person in the world. But what bothered her most was the man, the one who had been watching them from the Bentley across the street. His presence had been unsettling, as if he saw something in her that she couldn't see herself. It made her uneasy, but she had shoved the thought aside, focusing instead on the fact that her brother needed her, and the bills still piled up. Life didn't care about coincidences or strange encounters. As she walked into Haven Street Diner for another long shift, the bell above the door chimed, announcing a customer. She didn't look up at first, used to the steady flow of locals seeking comfort in a hot meal. But then, something unusual happened. She felt it. his gaze. Elena Harper? The deep voice from behind her was unmistakable, rich, and commanding. She turned around to find none other than the man from the night before, Alexander Kingston. He stood in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted by the morning light, his eyes dark and intense, locked onto hers as if she were the only person in the room. "Mr. Kingston," she asked, her heart racing, surprised that he knew her name. "What are you doing here?" "I wanted to speak with you," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Please, may I sit?" She motioned to a nearby booth, still trying to process the situation. As he sat, Alexander's eyes never left hers, assessing her with an intensity that sent a chill down her spine. "I was at the diner last night," he began, his words slow and deliberate. "I saw what you did for my son, Oliver." Elena's heart skipped a beat. "Your son?" She hadn't known. "Yes," Alexander confirmed, his expression unreadable. "Oliver has disabilities. He's often left feeling alone in the world. But last night you gave him something no one else had, a sense of belonging, even if just for a moment." Elena didn't know what to say. It was hard to believe he was talking about that simple act of kindness. "I don't know why I'm telling you this, but I've never seen someone care like you did. It's rare, and I value that." He paused, watching her closely. "I want to offer you a job at Titan Industries." Elena blinked, shocked. "A job? But She stopped herself. She had no qualifications, no background in business. She was just a waitress, nothing special. "I know," he interrupted gently, "but I've seen enough to know that what you do best is care. And I need someone like you at Titan Industries, someone who sees people for who they are, not for their titles or their wealth." Elena felt a knot tighten in her chest. Was this some kind of joke? A billionaire CEO offering her a job? It didn't make sense. "You're serious?" she asked, still stunned. "I'm more serious than you think," he said, his tone unwavering. "You don't need qualifications to be a part of something bigger. You just need heart, Elena." The offer hung in the air, heavy with possibility. Elena stared at him, her mind racing. She had always dreamed of a better life. But this felt like a dream too far out of reach. But something inside her, a quiet whisper, urged her to take the leap. Maybe, just maybe, this was the moment her life could change forever. The next few days passed in a blur for Elena. She couldn't stop thinking about Alexander Kingston's offer. Titan Industries. The name alone carried a weight she couldn't ignore. It felt like a dream, something too far out of her reach. She had no formal education, no background in business. She had spent years working long hours at the diner just to make ends meet. The thought of stepping into a world so far removed from her own was terrifying. But then, there was the boy, Oliver. She couldn't forget his eyes, the way they had lit up when she had sat beside him in the diner. She had never known that something as simple as a warm meal could matter so much to someone. She had seen too much pain in her life to ignore the possibility of making a real difference, even if it was just one person at a time. As the days wore on, Elena found herself drawn to the idea. The thought of a future where she wasn't struggling to get by, where she didn't have to worry about how to pay the rent or if her brother had enough food, it was too enticing to ignore. She knew she couldn't pass up this opportunity, even if it scared her. On the morning she was scheduled to meet Alexander again, Elena dressed carefully, choosing an outfit she thought might be acceptable in a corporate environment. Her hands shook slightly as she adjusted the hem of her blouse, the gravity of what she was about to do settling in her chest. When she arrived at Titan Industries, the towering glass building was nothing like the diner. It was sleek, modern, and intimidating. She stood outside for a moment, staring up at the structure, wondering if she truly belonged here. But then she remembered Oliver and the warmth that had radiated from him when she helped him the night of the storm. Elena stepped inside. The lobby was pristine, with marble floors that gleamed under the bright overhead lights. A receptionist smiled politely and directed her to the elevator. As the doors closed, Elena's heart raced. She wasn't just stepping into a new job. She was stepping into a whole new life. When the elevator doors opened on the top floor, she was greeted by Alexander himself. He was waiting for her, his usual composed demeanor giving nothing away. "Welcome to Titan Industries, Elena," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you," she replied, trying to steady her voice. She had no idea what to expect, but her heart was pounding in her chest. As he led her to her office, she felt the weight of every step. There was no going back now. The first few weeks were a whirlwind of adjustment. Elena was out of her element, surrounded by sharp minds and polished professionals who didn't exactly make her feel welcome. The whispers behind her back were inevitable. "A waitress?" they muttered. "She doesn't belong here." Elena had heard it all before, but the sting was sharper this time. She worked harder than ever, determined to prove herself, but the doubts weighed heavily on her. Was she good enough for this? Was she really meant to be here? Her first major test came sooner than expected. A sensitive piece of company information had leaked, and all signs pointed to her. Her stomach dropped when she was called into a meeting with the HR team. Accusations flew, the room heavy with suspicion. Elena knew she hadn't done anything wrong, but her voice felt too small against the tidal wave of doubt crashing down on her. They had no evidence, but her position, being someone from the outside, from a humble background, made her an easy target. Her trust was on the line. "I swear I didn't do it," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't leak anything. I would never do that." But no one seemed to believe her. The room grew colder with each passing moment. As she left the meeting, her mind raced. What was happening? Why was this happening to her? And yet, deep down, she knew she couldn't let them take away the one chance she had at a new life. She had to find the truth, no matter the cost. Days turned into weeks, and the weight of the accusation hung over Elena like a dark cloud. Each day felt like a battle she wasn't sure she could win. Her colleagues eyed her with suspicion, and the whispers behind her back had become louder, more biting. The pressure mounted as the investigation into the leaked information continued. Despite her protests, it seemed like everyone had already decided she was guilty. But Elena refused to give up. She knew she wasn't the one behind the leak, and she couldn't let this define her. She had worked too hard, come too far, to let it all slip away based on a lie. The doubt gnawed at her, but so did the determination to prove herself. She began her own investigation. Late nights at the office, poring over every document, every email, searching for something, anything, that could prove her innocence. At first it felt like a hopeless task, but then she found something. A pattern, a name that kept coming up in the chain of communication. Someone who had been unusually quiet throughout the investigation. It was a senior executive, someone who had everything to gain from framing her. Elena's heart raced as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. She knew she had to act fast, but she also knew she couldn't do it alone. She needed someone who had the power to make things right, and that's when she turned to Alexander. She found him in his office late one evening, sitting behind his massive desk, looking every bit the CEO he was. The weight of the company's problems seemed to rest on his shoulders, but when he saw her, his gaze softened. "Elena?" he asked, his voice calm but concerned. "What's going on?" "I think I know who did it," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "I think I know who leaked the information." Alexander raised an eyebrow, leaning forward. "Tell me everything." And she did. She explained the evidence she had found, the name that had surfaced again and again, the discrepancies in the timing of the leak. Alexander listened intently, his expression unreadable, but there was no mistaking the glint of something, hope, in his eyes. "I'll take care of it," he said, his voice low and firm. "You did the right thing coming to me." The next day, Alexander moved swiftly. The senior executive was removed from his position, and the truth came out. Elena had been right. The man had been trying to sabotage the company, and he had thought framing Elena would be the perfect way to cover his tracks. Elena was vindicated, but the battle hadn't been easy. The tension in the office began to dissipate, and her colleagues, once skeptical, began to look at her differently. It wasn't just the fact that she had uncovered the truth. It was the way she had handled herself, the way she had fought for what was right, even when everything seemed stacked against her. As for Alexander, his faith in her had only grown stronger. "You're exactly what Titan Industries need," he said to her one day as they walked through the office. "You don't just have heart, you have the courage to stand up for it, no matter the cost." Elena felt a sense of pride she had never known before. She had proven herself not just to Alexander, but to herself. She was more than a waitress. She was more than the girl from the diner. She was part of something bigger now, part of a family, a team that believed in her. And as she looked over at Alexander, standing tall and confident beside her, Elena realized that sometimes the most unexpected people can change your life forever. Sometimes all it takes is one kind gesture, one leap of faith, to open doors you never thought possible. Her journey was far from over, but for the first time, Elena felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be.